So we are live on YouTube and we are
Right.
live on the cloud. That was the smoothest that's happened in a long time. So we will get started. We only have two sections that we're going to cover tonight. That's 4.7 to let me take a look at the syllabus. I believe it's 4.7 through 4.8. Not too long of a section, so we might actually be done a little bit early and can do some flashcards or give you some time back, up to you. Bear with me just one quick second while I verify. All right, so January 8th. Yep. Lesson 14 is 4.7, 4.8. Looks like we're going to do only about 10 pages or so, 10 to 12 pages. So shouldn't be too long. We'll talk about organizational culture, and then we'll also talk about a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which many of you are probably very well aware of that. And so we'll get through that. And then again, like I said, we'll have some time to maybe do some flashcards or go through our other stuff. Let's see. All right, just checking the chat. And all right, perfect. All right, so with that, we will jump right into Unit 4. And again, like I mentioned, we're going to discuss organizational culture. If you want to follow along in the book, we are going to start on page 290. And at the end of the class, we are going to get to page 302. Here are your learning objectives. And you can see here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about organizational culture. And just know that a company's climate and culture within is really based on and created by beliefs and behaviors of people in our workforce. So our leadership as well as our employees. And what we want to push here is that this is all going to be interrelated with the company's mission, vision, values, and objectives, which we talked about previously. And so you will find or you will see that people, depending where you work or where you intend to work, people may be very driven at work by the mission of the organization or company that you're working for. It may not always be the mission, but it could be the vision or the values that really kind of propel your work forward and make you kind of invigorated, if you will, to want to work there. It's really important that as we do that, we need to differentiate between climate and culture, because climate and culture are not the same. All right. So, what is important is that climate really describes the characteristics that are temporary, and are capable of being changed within. Whereas the culture is going to be very much so built into the roots of the organization, generally refers to organizational rules and beliefs that are endured, that are pretty resistant to change, meaning you're not going to come in one day and say, let's change this and it take off and be well and be life-changing for people within the organization. And so as we kind of work through this, you'll hear a little bit about some of those things that could impact culture versus climate. So when we're talking about organizational culture, again, the organizational culture is really going to be things that are kind of tangible, and again, they're the ways that we're going to work through the company and be harder to change. You'll be able to see this a lot more um, deeper within like the roots of the entire organization. So some of the things that would be considered part of culture are going to be things like cultural artifacts. And so those are different behaviors that happen across the organization. They are languages, physical symbols. These are really those items or behaviors that you can really perceive with like senses. They reflect rules and core beliefs of the culture and the organization that we have. And then we have shared norms, which are really kind of situation specific. They're not often directly there and visible, but we generally would infer them from the organization's artifacts. So a lot of this could be determined by the consistency of the group and how they act. So one of the key examples that the book gives around this is going to be you can see there like uniforms. That may be one of the items, or grooming standards, as ways that you would be able to see that. And then we have shared norms, which again kind of stem. I just had that up there. Sorry, I didn't advance the slide. We have cultural values, which are beliefs and ideas and feelings of what is good, proper, valuable, and right. And so this is really kind of driven again by the mission and the work that's being done within the organization. And it really represents the collective belief amongst everybody that's working there. And then we have the shared assumptions, which provide a foundation on how people think and what happens in the organization. And the shared assumptions really goes pretty deep into the culture. And so when you have the shared assumptions, they could be pretty hard to see or kind of work through within the organization. Again, because they're so deep within, and it really helps drive how we do the work that we are doing. And then you can see with the development of culture, um, it's really important that we have expectations of the founders and the leaders. And then we work with member contributions to continue it, and then historical contributions. And so founders will obviously have the largest influence on the culture of the organization, because they get the ability to build this company or organization up from the beginning. And they put their expectations, decisions, and how they treat people out into the organization. And then as the organization evolves and we hire new people and train people up, it really kind of helps spread what they've initially brought into the organization. And this really has a really big impact on what the employees value, but also how people on the outside view the organization that you're working with. And the member contributions of an organization really work to bring in their own personal cultures and beliefs within. And they start to bring that in from their outside lives and communities. Maybe some of your employees will bring in different kind of religions with them, or professional associations. And this is kind of allowing people, the member contributions is really allowing people to show up as their true, authentic self to work. And having a culture that supports that really makes people feel safe, whether that's physically or psychologically safe. And then we have the historical accommodations. And when you have historical accommodations, it's important to really dig into that and make sure that there's the external adaptation, but also the internal integration of that historical accommodation within. The external adaptation refers to the way that the organization survives by navigating that constantly changing external environment. Remember, it's important for us to remain agile so that we can kind of pivot to the changes that are happening. The internal integration is really where we're establishing and maintaining those work relationships amongst different members within the organization. So it's really important to understand kind of what those expectations and what founders and leaders would bring, as opposed to what members bring into the organization. So remember that founders and leaders are really kind of starting out the organization, bringing in what they have as their true authentic self, and they're really setting the company up for success there. But it's really the members' contributions to ensure that they're able to come to work as them true selves. And then when we're maintaining the organizational culture, there's a couple of different forces that we will talk about um, that really help us to continue what was built by our founders or leaders, and really again continue to drive that work forward. And so with that, we have selection and discipline. And so this is really going to work with our talent acquisition teams and our HR planning and strategic partnerships that we have. And this is going to be around ensuring that as we're doing our recruitment process, we're working to find the right people to fill the right roles within our organization. So this is really based around finding that fit. Now, I don't really like to refer to somebody, oh, they're not like a fit within our culture or anything like that, because really people can fit anywhere and we wouldn't want to outcast people. We just want to make sure that we're putting people in the right roles that allow them to really accelerate their contributions to the organization. And then we have reward and status allocation. And with this is how does a leader lead and how do they manage their teams? Do people again feel appreciated for the work that they're doing? And that will help them continue to do that good work. And by doing that, naturally people around them will continue to do the same work. So it allows you to build out that culture. Leaders' reactions. And so, what are the consequences and what are the values? And again, remember that we have our employee handbook, and our employee handbook will really help our leaders to react appropriately in situations. Because ideally, our handbook will give them the exact tools that they need to know how to respond to each instance of things that are going on. Rites and ceremonies, so style of meetings and the interactions amongst people. And this is really important with organizational culture. And in fact, in the organization that I work for, during COVID, when there was a lot of civil unrest, this was actually really good, and came in pretty good style for some of the meetings that we had, where we've done it with everything happening in the Middle East, and we've also done it with all that civil unrest where we have meetings and instead of coming with an agenda, we actually allowed people we had kind of what we referred to as a Quaker style and meeting. And if anybody is familiar with what a Quaker style meeting is, um, it's very similar to the way, they do funerals and stuff like that. There's no planned agenda. You kind of come into a small meeting house. You sit in pews that are based in a square around the room. And you really sit there in silence and do a lot of self-reflection. And when you feel that the time is right, you stand up or sit down and speak out on what you think is right. And it really allows you to kind of speak authentically, but also set boundaries to say no single person in this meeting is right. Instead, it allows open, honest dialogue, where you're able to kind of touch on the heavier subjects while keeping it still professional, but ensuring that you're not speaking overtly about one specific side over the other to potentially harm people or make them feel psychologically unsafe. And so being able to see that and apply that to this situation really kind of goes to show the culture work that's happened to make sure that everybody feels um, welcomed and understood and valued. And we actually use it as an acronym, feel the WOV, which is welcomed, understood, and valued. So we want everybody to quote unquote feel the WOV. And that was one of the ways that we did it during that period of time. You want to use stories and symbols. So depending on, again, how driven your organization is by our mission, we do this very often. We had an entire, in one of our auditoriums, an entire wall of portraits of old doctors and old leaders within the organization over the last, 165 years. And what we did was we actually took all of those pictures down and we turned it into our employee branding. And we made an exhibit of employee stories, and we had professional photographers come out and take pictures. And instead of having pictures of these people up, we actually switched it to tell stories about the people that we work with. Um, we put out a lot of internal marketing kind of videos to make people connect to that mission no matter where they are within their organization. And so, we put out a lot of stories about how different families would impact people that work within the organization, or how different recognition kind of helped people kind of just navigate through what work is these days. And so, depending on how involved kind of people are within the organization, this may be a really good way to kind of talk about culture. And then reaction to problems. How do people cope across the organization? Is this an organization where people just kind of are quick to react and they don't kind of sit on it and think about it? What's that reaction look like? Are we a reactive company or are we a proactive company? And that'll really help kind of shape what that internal culture is, because if we're not going to just react because of something came up, then people would feel more comfortable talking, and people would feel more comfortable coming to their leaders and having a conversation. Whereas if we get that conversation and just react right away, it could turn into kind of like a, oh no, I'm scared, and again, I don't feel psychologically safe to have a conversation with my um, with my leaders. And then how do we change organizational culture? Now I want to say that it's obviously we would know that it's not going to be an easy change. It's not something that happens right away. And it's really something that needs to get buy-in from other people across the organization. And so when we're thinking about changing an organization's culture, it could be very difficult. People could be very upset. It's just the way we've done things. This is how we've always done it. There's no reason to fix it if it's not broken. All of that could be said. But what you need to do is you would need to conduct a culture audit. And so you're going to take a look at what's currently going on and what needs to happen in order for us to make the change. And where do we want to go? And then what you're going to do is you're going to assess the need for change. Why do we need to change? Why is this happening? You want to unfreeze your current culture, meaning you want to start picking it apart and really kind of working as a team across the entire organization to start getting that information out there about where we're going and how we're going to get there. You then want to use your peers around the organization to elicit support. From This slide calls it the cultural elite. However, that kind of insinuates a hierarchy. And so for me, you want to elicit the support from people around the organization that have already bought into your culture, and are kind of with you for the long haul. And whenever we're going through kind of like change management or any kind of projects where there's a pretty big change involved, you really want to what I refer to as kind of infiltrate from within. You want to get people on your side, and you want those people to be the ones that go back to their teams to talk about the change and to talk about what's going on. And when you do that, it generally, when you hear change from your peers and how it's going to impact you specifically, and you can apply a story or a backstory to it, or apply directly how it's going to change their role, make it easier, whatever the case is, generally people will be more willing to understand and get it from you rather than just taking it from HR or the leadership team. And so you really want to elicit support from people around the organization that have already bought into your culture, and work with them to really get other people on board as well. Once you do that, you'll be able to implement the intervention strategy. So, what are we going to do now that's going to help change this culture? And how do we implement it? Again, working with those people around the organization. And once you implement that strategy, you're going to then monitor and evaluate. And so when you monitor and evaluate, you're again going to just make sure that the change is sticking. I think of like that pasta on the wall, like sometimes it just falls off, but if you do it right and finish up the process, it will stick. And so you can't rush it. You really have to work through this very diligently to ensure that you have all of the right people at the table, and you have a solid communication plan with employee buy-in. All right, so let's do a quick knowledge check here. And changing the organization's culture is what? All right. So I see a lot of answers coming in, and I see many of them say C, which is correct. Let's see. All right. So changing an organization's culture is difficult because it requires an alteration of the basic assumptions of the organization. Um, and therefore, it is good for us to know that when we change the organization's culture, as I mentioned on the previous slide, it could be pretty dramatic or difficult, than modifying other parts of our system. So a culture change, we know now, will require an alteration of basic assumptions, and implementation and work from other people around the organization to again make sure that we are able to implement and have that change stick. All right. All right, so that is the end of that section. And now we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or also referred to pretty commonly as DE and I. Um, and then DE and I is very important, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, it used to be really specific around diversity and inclusion, and then equity was added in. One of the other pieces that really is important in this kind of scenario or equation is the sense of belonging. It's really important to make sure that people also feel as though they belong to the organization or that they belong here within the company that we're working for. And so like the way that we explain diversity, equity, and inclusion to new employees that are coming into our organization is like diversity is making sure that we have a wide range of people at the party. Equity is making sure that everybody has the ability to participate at the party. They all were able to get there. Inclusion is making sure that people are eating with us and come into the dance floor. But belonging is making sure that people feel comfortable enough to come out and dance with us. So usually you'll get people to come to the party, you'll get people to sit at the table at the party, and you'll get people to eat, but they may not be dancing because they may not feel that sense of belonging. And so belonging really kind of takes it to the next level, to make sure that people again feel welcomed and understood and valued and all of that. So belonging is kind of another piece that takes diversity, equity, and inclusion a little bit further. So here is your learning objectives from this section. And we're going to talk about diversity. Why is this? Interesting. Okay. For some reason, this slide is being weird. There we go. All right. So Again, diversity versus inclusion. Diversity programs really work to improve the representation of underrepresented groups within our organization. And so you'll see a lot of work around diversity happening within the talent acquisition space, really making sure that our talent pools have diverse candidates. We're casting a wide net, making sure that we are bringing the right people into the organization. Whereas inclusion is really that culture of making sure that people feel accepted into the organization, and that we're not doing any sort of kind of like mean girls and having this sense of separation or cliques amongst the organization. We want people to really feel that ability to be able to kind of cross-pollinate, work within their teams. um, and so when we're working with diversity programs, again, it's really important that we understand that that's kind of bringing people to the table that may be underrepresented. And so, as I mentioned, this happens a lot with our talent acquisition work to ensure that we are doing the proper recruitment and we're posting on the right job boards and really bringing in a diverse group of applicants. Also, around different training opportunities, we want to make sure that our workforce is being trained appropriately. Remember, part of our employee life cycle is really to continue that development of our employees. We want to really make sure that all of our employees are getting the opportunity for training. And if you remember back to our math equation that we were doing back during our talent acquisition piece around adverse impact, it's really important to make sure that you keep in mind that 4/5 rule. So like giving people the ability to um, be selected for roles, whether it's promotional opportunities or leadership development, et cetera. You want to make sure that that is open to the entire workforce of people that are eligible. And so maybe you may implement different diversity um, pieces around different training opportunities. And then it is important to also call out that sometimes, as I just mentioned, you may want to work on the diversity of the population at your organization or company. But just know that there is a fine line where you could make that this kind of work can be harmful to other people. And so it's really important that you assess for the company that you are. It's not one size fits all. And so you want to make sure that the people that you are trying to help are not getting harmed in the meantime. And when there isn't the ability to have kind of that culture of inclusion, different employee groups may feel targeted by diversity initiatives, which could impact or make it a little bit harder for things within the organization to take off or integrate within the organization. Therefore, it could be counterproductive. So, when diversity is sought out after just for the sake of diversity, where there's no intention or regard for the inclusion aspect, generally speaking, you will see lower levels of performance, but also see higher levels of conflict within the um, company. And because of that, you will also see poor employee morale, meaning your employees aren't necessarily happy to come to work every day. They're most likely just there because they want to get paid. Um, and so then when on the other hand, when you have diversity work happening, that's really combined with that culture of inclusion, it will then lead to the opposite, which is higher performance and higher employee morale. And people will be more likely to kind of cross-pollinate or collaborate with people in other teams, meaning that it's actually going to be able to help increase your performance and higher levels of innovation, again, because people are talking to each other. Um, Inclusion is an elusive goal, so keep that in mind. So you want to just kind of realize that. And then diversity or the lack thereof is really able to be measured by different reports, policy changes, and you really want to make sure that within a department or even an organizational level, you're implementing policies and recruitment procedures to really ensure that your diversity work is happening with intention. Inclusion could be difficult to quantify. And again, it could be more so related to individual attitudes and behaviors and not necessarily things that we could easily change. And so that could be one of the holdups that you see within the inclusion space. And then we have implementing diversity initiatives. And with the diversity initiatives, you want to start at the top, meaning that you really want, like your CEO or COO, et cetera, get involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that way you can get buy-in from the very top. Now, back in 2015, when our CEO was announced, this diversity and equity and inclusion was the space that was kind of like her pillar that she saw was one of the most important and biggest areas of opportunity. And so having that made the diversity work happen a lot more natural because the communication and information was coming up from the top. You want to define the objectives. Again, we're not just going to blanket statement and say we are increasing our diversity work in FY25. We want to have very specific objectives and ways that we're going to meet those objectives so that everybody is working with intention. Make sure that you have the ability to collect those demographic data points that we talked about when we're talking about an HRIS or an HCM. It's really important to have collection points to say like, okay, we started here and now we are here, which means our work is working, and we are pushing this work forward. Collecting different survey data, maybe some pre-data, post-data, that really helps to initiate, to kind of figure out where we need to start and what are things that are weighing on people heavier than others, and use that to identify those problem areas. Once we identify the problem areas, we're going to work to address them by implementing different initiatives, and those initiatives will help correct the problems around the organization. So depending on how large of an organization you are and what those changes look like, it could happen at different times within the process. There may be pieces that are quick fixes that we can implement relatively soon. And there are pieces that may take an entire process change or an entire policy change. There may be financial impact to implementing that change. So it's really important that you address and kind of put on your levels like, okay, where does this fall within this short-term fix, long-term fix, or impossible fix that we need to put so much work and energy into? You want to then measure the outcomes and ensure you have the ability to provide feedback. And then, as you would with anything else, you want to make sure that you have the ability to come back and make any edits or adjustments as needed as you are working through, to again make sure that that work sticks and you're able to take it to the next level. I really don't know why this is doing this. Like the slide's not working right. All right, so employee resource groups or ERGs are pretty important to your organization. Again, depending on what size of organization you have, you may have multiple ERGs, or you may just have like one or two. ERGs are really a group of employees within an organization, and what you do is, excuse me, sorry about that. You have people join together within the organization to really be able to provide support, development opportunities, networking opportunities, etc., of people that are built up of like-minded kind of purpose. And so you can put these ERGs into different kind of groups if you find that fit for your organization. But it's also very important that you have the ability to allow employees to discuss the ability to start or create additional ERGs out of what you may already have. The reason for that is, again, it helps with that inclusion and belonging process where people would feel more comfortable working with your organization. ERGs are generally employee run, and what they do is, again, they'll provide mutual support to people within. Different organizations have a different slew of ERGs available to them. There's some examples in the book. At my organization, we have a multicultural professional network, we have a multicultural nursing alliance network, we have the LGBTQIA Pride network. We have a young professionals network. We have the women's ERG. So, we have a couple of different ERGs. We have 7 to be exact. And it's important that you're able to uh, give people that space to work and connect. Um, I find myself very involved in ERGs again because it allows me to give people the ability to connect on a higher level with people in the organization. And I'm an organization of about 29,000 people. And so there's days where you don't see the same people over and over. I am actually part of the LGBTQIA. I'm one of the executive officers. I'm also in, the Young Professionals Network and the Multicultural Professional Network. The more that you join, the more connection you have with your company or your organization, and the more it allows you to contribute to other people, meaning that you would be started to you would be one of those people that your organization should be coming to help kind of shift that culture change that we were talking before as one of those quote unquote, again, I don't like the terminology, but quote unquote cultural elites. And it's because you're so connected and you're so involved in the organization that you're somebody that people would take your word for and trust kind of on the outside. So definitely make sure that you have the ability to join them. And then you don't really need to know much about it, but community outreach, depending on how mission driven your organization is very important as well. I work at a nonprofit organization, so we need to give back to our community. And my organization, as part of our kind of culture work to really drum up what volunteerism looks like and community outreach looks like, we not only have an entire community impact department that does specifically that, we also have policies that provide the space for employees to do the work. And so, we have a volunteer policy where we get 5 days of paid volunteer time every 2 years that we work with the organization. And it allows us to use that time to go and volunteer within our network. Now, I have to provide that support to people within the community that we serve because that's part of our 403(b) nonprofit status. But we also have the opportunity as a healthcare organization with global impact. We have the ability to go to, some of our worldwide health centers that we have. So, like, there's a clinic in the Dominican Republic, there's a clinic in Botswana, and we're allowed to volunteer to go to those clinics on kind of like missionary status where we go to provide support to clinicians. So there's plenty of opportunity, and again, giving people and your staff that opportunity really helps them to become a lot more mission driven and more kind of adapt to your culture, and it really kind of propels that loyalty, if you will, to people within to stay within your organization. All right, so let's do a quick knowledge check. And here you can see that there are a couple of correct answers. So please make sure that you select all that are correct. All right, so I see a couple of answers coming in. Just want to make sure for those of you that only put one option in the chat, you would definitely get it wrong. This one is nice enough to tell you to select all three correct responses. But just know on the chat, I mean, on the test, it may just say like select all that apply or something similar to that. So this specifically calls out three responses. So you should have relating which of the following approaches tend to promote lasting diversity and inclusion within an organization. You want to relate diversity and inclusion initiatives to the core mission of the organization. Create clear stated diversity goals and pre-established metrics for how we're going to measure success. And make sure that all diversity and inclusion initiatives start at the top of the org chart, meaning you want to really get your CEOs and COOs involved in what that looks like. All right, so those are the small amount of slides that we have for this unit. So make sure that you have the ability to do that unit assessment on page 302. Just three quick questions. You want to make sure you can explain the steps for creating the DE&I initiative, list and describe different initiatives, and be able to describe the benefits of that. All right. So with that, we have two options. We could go through some Unit 4 flashcards, or I could do Units 1 through 4 flashcards, just not talk about things that we haven't talked about in Unit 4 yet. Or you can have time back on your lovely Monday morning or evening. Wow, definitely not morning. Just let me know what you want to do in the chat and we'll go from there. Charity, I did see your email come through. I wasn't around my book to give you specific pages. You should know about HRIS generally, and HCM. HR management systems is kind of a step of HCM, and so don't focus too hard on the HR management systems. You really want to know HRIS versus HCM. All right. So we only have one response on what they want to do, so feel free. If you are not interested in going over flashcards, you can go ahead and sign off. Use this time to maybe complete a Unit 4 practice test, a time test or a practice test, whatever you feel comfortable with. Or we can go through, if you stay on, we will go through a couple of flashcards for about 10 minutes and go from there. Just give me one quick second. I'm going to mute my line so I can go grab a tissue. Be right back. All right. So I'm going to grab my flashcard. So just give me one quick second. And I am going to go through the stack. We'll start with some in Unit 1. And we will go from there. So let me just take out Unit 1 and shuffle them up a little bit, so that I can hopefully trick some of you and make sure that you are getting a full comprehension. All right. So the first one, just remember, I'll read the definition, you give the word. That way it's easier to participate. Okay. A reduction in the number of personnel. This is unit one. A reduction in the number of personnel caused by failing to replace people who leave. Joe got it. That is attrition. Good job, Joe. Let's see. Here's a good one. All right. A decision constructed by a court that an employee who quits was actually discharged because of intolerable working conditions. A decision constructed by a court that an employee who quit was actually discharged because of intolerable working conditions. Good job again, Joe. Constructive discharge is correct. It is constructive discharge. Let's see. Um, Here's a good one. A legal theory that makes employers liable for abusive acts of employees if the employer knew or should have known about the employee's ability for such conduct. I remember talking about this. A legal theory that makes employers liable for abusive acts of employers if the employer knew or should have known about the employee's ability for such conduct. Charity got this one. Negligent hiring. Good job, Charity. All right, here's one that we didn't talk too much about, but by definition, you should probably get it. Employment practices that could be considered unfair because they show favoritism to friends or relatives. Employment practices that are considered unfair because they show favoritism to friends or relatives. Nepotism. There it is, right there in the chat. That is nepotism. Um, hmm. An interview format in which one applicant is interviewed by a group of interviewers at one time. Panel. You got it, Philip. Good job. All right, last one from Unit 1, and then we are going to go into Unit 2. Efforts by an employer to facilitate the employment of a disabled person that are not excessively expensive and do not interfere with normal operations. Efforts by an employer to facilitate, yep, Philip, you got that one again. That is accommodations, a reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation. All right, let's move on into Unit 2. Let me get out our Unit 2 flashcards and we'll start there. All right. Ready? When employees are terminated for reasons beyond their control. Deanna, you got that one. That is involuntary turnover. Here's one that we talked about a couple of times. A process that occurs when people know their behavior is being observed and behave differently as a result of being evaluated. A process that occurs when people know their behavior is being observed and behave differently as a result of being evaluated. Ah, Deanna, you got that one. That is Hawthorne effect. Charity halo is actually somebody recently did something really good, and so you praise them, and then you kind of remember that good situation, and so you biasly praise them on other situations. But Hawthorne effect is the overall process of somebody changing because they know that they're being evaluated. All right, we spent some time on this conversation, so let's see if you all remember this. A training technique in which trainees are placed in a special training room that is a replication of the actual job situation. Remember, we talked about the difference between this and something else. A training technique in which trainees are placed in a special training room that is a replication of the actual job situation. Deanna, you're close. Off job training, you're close. Can go a little bit more specific than that. Charity, you got the other one. So remember the conversation about bank tellers going into a place that looks like the bank, and they do training based off of that situation and that environment. It was called what kind of training? Deanna, yeah, vestibule training. Simulation training, remember, is learning to respond to the environment. All right. So vestibule is being in the environment, doing like the real world work. Simulation is being trained in an environment to respond to the environment that you're in. Let's see. A systematic approach to fully integrate a new employee into the organization and its culture. A systematic approach to fully integrate a new employee into the organization and its culture. Divana, you got this one right. This one was onboarding. Remember, onboarding is the process, orientation is the event. All right. Let's talk about the development of a sequential series of career activities that an individual might pursue during his or her career. Career pathing, that's correct, Joe. You got that one right. Let's see. All right, here we go. A form of evaluation bias in which one attribute influences the evaluation of other traits. Sometimes a distinction is made between the influence of positive and negative characteristics. This refers to the influence of one positive perception, while the other is referring to the influence of one negative perception. Charity flying away on that keyboard right now. A form of evaluation bias in which one attribute influences the evaluation of other traits. Sometimes a distinction is made between the influence of positive and negative characteristics. Blank refers to the influence of one positive's perception, and the other refers to the influence of one negative perception. Deanna, you got that right. That is halo effect. The other perception would be horn effect. All right. Last one that we'll have on unit 2, and then we'll spend a minute or a couple of minutes on unit 3. An extensively used training technique that consists of showing a trainee how to perform an activity and supervising the trainee's attempt to learn it. On the job, close. A little bit more specific. This one might be a trick one for you. Just give it another minute before I give the answer if needed. Aruna, you got it. Job instruction training. All right, let's move on to Unit 3 for the last couple of minutes. Employer provided reimbursements for medical expenses that are excluded from taxable income, but subject to maximum dollar limits for coverage. Unused funds at the end of the period can be carried forward to subsequent periods. Deanna, you got this one. Divana, you got this one. This one is Health Reimbursement Arrangement, or HRA. An FSA is flexible spending. Health reimbursement is more so to pay the cost. All right, let's take a look at another one. Provides healthcare services emphasizing preventative medicine at a fixed monthly rate. It's a type of insurance that provides healthcare services emphasizing preventative medicine at a fixed monthly rate. Deanna, you got that. Charity, good job. Who was first? Devana, you got that one. Perfect. All right. Unit 3 might be too easy for you all. This law gives employees greater flexibility in responding to family needs and medical emergencies without the fear of losing their job. This entitles you, eligible employees, to take up to 12 weeks. You got it. I see FML. LOL. That is correct. FMLA. Let's look at this one. Paid leave that can be used for illness, vacation, or accumulated for early retirement. Paid leave that can be used for illness, vacation, or accumulated for early retirement. You all pretty much got it. PTO, vacation time. It's paid personal leave. Yep. However you want it, whatever acronym you want to use. All right, so let's do a quick couple from see if I can get one or two from Unit 4 that are not too far down in the pile here, but that will help a little bit. All right. The characteristics describing an organization that are relatively visible and stable, but are amendable to change. You got it, Deanna. That is going to be climate. Let's see. We didn't talk about that. Shared beliefs and expectations among the members of an organization that are relatively enduring and resistant to change. You got it, Joe. That one is culture, correct. All right. Let's see. The practice of contracting with outside specialists to perform human resource functions. Contract employees. Go bigger than that. Not that specific. What is the act? What are you doing? That is correct. You are outsourcing. Let's take a look at the social values that are shared amongst the members of an organization and tend to regulate their individual behaviors and induce collective conformity. It's a lot of words. This is the last one that we got. You got it. Social values that are shared among the members of an organization and tend to regulate their individual behaviors and induce collective conformity. Should be in that last in that first section that we talked about tonight. Close to page 290. Carla, you're close. This one is cultural values. So the social values that are shared among the members of an organization and tend to regulate their individual behaviors and induce collective conformity. All right, so that is the lesson for tonight. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And we are